Many of your applications to this fellowship underscored a troubling reality in our industry, that resources are rapidly dwindling, and that decades of expertise is walking out the door. And it's why I called on the Sunlight Research Center. This nonpartisan, talented group of experts helps equip news organizations to support investigative reporting, holding local leaders to account, and delivering on journalism's public service obligation. Anna Massoglia is the Director of Investigations for the group. She's with us today, along with Elizabeth Clemons, who is the Director of Training. And they're here to share access to data sets, search tools, and best practices tailored to boost any newsroom. And I think at the end, you'll all be able to take back something to your news organizations that you'll be able to use. So please welcome Anna and Elizabeth.
This is on.
Great. All right. Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you all so much for having us here today. We're so excited to be here, and we're really grateful for the National Press Foundation for inviting us to be here today. We're going to be talking today about Sunlight Research Center. I recognize some of your faces and your names, so I think that we've interacted over the past year or so. But we'll also be talking about reporting and research with at-risk public records. I'm Elizabeth Clemons. As he mentioned, I'm the Director of Training and Tools here at Sunlight. I have a background in investigative research, so I've worked with different organizations, including the Department of Defense and Campaign for Accountability. I've done research on various topics, including gender-based violence and looking at data privacy violations. I've been at Sunlight since the very beginning, a little over 2 years ago. And it's been really cool to see our evolution over the past 2+ years. And a lot of what I do here is the training and tools. So yeah, some of you have attended our different workshops over the past 1.5 years or so. And same with the tools. I hope that some of you have interacted with different tools that we've created. And I'll go more into that in a couple of slides, but I'll let Anna introduce herself as well.
I'm Anna Massoglia. I'm the Director of Investigations at Sunlight Research Center. As a part of that, I run what's called our research desk, which is effectively a shared research desk among a number of local and regional news organizations. I'll explain a little bit more about that later. I also work as an editor at an organization called MuckRock that works with public records requests, as well as an independent analyst with a number of different organizations, and sometimes a freelance writer and researcher. I'm really excited today to talk about disappearing government data, ways we can preserve that government data. My background is in tracking money in politics. I worked in an organization called Open Secrets for several years, where I tracked money from opaque sources, foreign political spending, and ran our editorial department. I've also worked at Bloomberg and a variety of other places over the years. So very excited to be bringing that expertise to shine some more light on how to better use government records and preserve them for future use. And I'll pass it over to Elizabeth for that.
Sweet. It's kind of loud. Anyways.
Is there a way we could stop?
Yeah.
Is that us?
That's probably us.
Oh,
got it.
Elizabeth.
We stand a little bit further apart. But if you'd like to scan this QR code, this will send you to Sunlight's website. But generally, to give some background on Sunlight, we started a little over 2 years ago, and we've evolved with what we've been offering to you all. But a couple of things that we offer, one include the community workshops that we host every month. Those are free for anyone in our community to attend. And the recordings I'll mention in a moment are also available online. We also have occasional premium certificate series, and so with those, you get a certificate and a digital badge to put on your resume or LinkedIn. We also have the Research Help Desk, which Anna leads, and she'll talk more about in a moment. But through that, different member newsrooms have access to really amazing research that our research team does. And thinking about the membership, we have various options. In a couple of slides, there'll be a QR code where you can access the membership link so you can see the different options that your newsroom could access. And one thing I want to mention is that if you aren't already a member, please do try to sign up soon if your newsroom is interested, because for a limited time, we have some philanthropic support to give discounted rates, discounted memberships to a limited number of newsrooms. But beyond that, we have an investigative toolkit that I'll go into in a couple of slides. And we have a Slack channel where you can engage with Sunlight's research experts and also research experts from different organizations. So if you're interested in joining that Slack channel, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. And along with the membership that we currently have, we're partnered with MuckRock, which is really exciting. And that means that if you're a paying member of Sunlight, you get access to a premium MuckRock account where you get 50 free public records requests per month. So I want to go into Sunlight's collective impact. This is something, it's really important for us. We don't want to just provide training and research, but we want to make sure that what we're doing is an impact on your local communities. And so over the past 2 years or so, we've connected with and helped to train and worked with for different news stories, over 400 journalists, over 100 newsrooms, and we've contributed to over 25 different stories. And speaking of the workshops, it's been really neat to see. We've had people attend them from all across the world. And so we love engaging with our community and growing our community as we grow. But yeah, as you can see here too, we really care about the impacts that we have on local communities. So thinking about the work that we did with Range, it led to a Spokane official pledging to divest from certain stocks. And same with Nevada Independent. There was local impact there where they called for revamped disclosure forms to potentially increase financial transparency. And yeah, I'll let Anna talk later on more about the impact of other stories that we've worked on. But as you can see on the left, there's a lot of different newsrooms that we've worked with, including Wisconsin Watch. And I see you, Bennett, here. Nice to see you. I'm bummed the slides looked different before, but that's okay. Anyways, so one way that Sunlight can help are the workshops and tools, which this is primarily what I do here at Sunlight. And so you can scan this QR code to explore and register for our different workshops. So as I mentioned, we have monthly community workshops. Those are free for anyone from our community to attend. And we have different topics varying from things like last month was sourcing. We've done, like interviewing 101 and how to conduct really good interviews, to things like, which we'll talk about today, government data disappearing and how you can collect and maintain your own data. And actually this month, at the end of this month, Anna Massoglia will be presenting on international business transactions. So if you want to chat a bit about that session, you can feel free to jump in.
All right, let's see if this works. All right, perfect. So this month we're going to be talking about international business transactions, basically tracing back shell companies, looking through the different layers of businesses and nonprofits that are not just having domestic presences, but also looking at offshore companies and bank accounts, and how to get a more complete picture of those organizations through a variety of different documents, not just looking at US-based documents, but also sources from other countries, how to get over language barriers if you don't have those language skills, that type of thing. So very excited for that one as well.
Yeah, we're really excited for that. And so make sure to sign up for that at that QR code there. And we also have occasional certificate premium workshops. We just hosted one of those series that was on candidate backgrounding, and it was focusing on the state and local level. And as I mentioned, if you complete those, you get a certificate and digital badge. We also host office hours, and there's community and members only office hours. And so these, the office hours that follow our community workshops are focused specifically on the workshops that we've provided. But the community office hours that we host, those are for anyone to come, and if you're working on a story or want some research help, you can attend and pick our brains and get some help from the Sunlight staff. Members only office hours, same thing, but it's for members only. And then lastly, we have an investigative toolkit, which I'll go into here. Yet again, you can scan this and explore the toolkit. But we have workshop recordings, which they're the community workshops, similar to the one that Anna's hosting this month. Those are recorded and uploaded to our site. So if you've missed one from the past, or you would like to rewatch something or learn about something, check out our workshop recordings. They're all available there. And then there's also tip sheets, and so almost all of our workshops that we host have an accompanying tip sheet with a ton of information and resources. And sometimes they're not just from workshops, like we have other tip sheets including things like state-by-state financial disclosures at the state level. And then we have reporting recipes. So these are detailed walkthroughs of like how to do some specific type of reporting. So one of them includes tracking PPP loans to political candidates. We also have how-to videos, which are quick and targeted how-to videos on, how to navigate certain databases, how to do certain type of research. Things that are included in this are like how to, navigate the SEC, how to analyze certain forms on the SEC, things like that. We also have templates. These are really helpful to keep you and your research organized. And so we have timelines and source lists here, and you can even track legislator activity on that as well. We also have things like a research guide, and the research guide is really helpful for if you're trying to navigate how to find information, whether it's open source or government information. You can filter through that whole research guide and then find different websites and databases to search. And we have an advanced internet search guide, which gives you tips on navigating different web browsers. And so thinking about our topic today, which is at-risk public records and public data, it's really important for us to be talking about that now. A lot of data is disappearing, and Anna and I will talk more about this as we're going throughout our session today. But that it's not just like a risk to transparency, but it's a risk to all of our reporting and all of our research, which is a risk to transparency. But we have, thinking about our specific toolkit, we have a workshop recording on a workshop that we did earlier this year on government data disappearing and what you can do to preserve data yourself. We have a tip sheet that goes along with that. And then we also have a reporting recipe on a Doge scraper that one of our reporters and researchers, Michael Nolan, created. And so this Doge scraper is really helpful because it walks you through how you can create something like this, which what it does is it scrapes the data from Doge and then it flags when there are changes made to Doge. And so looking at that one on our website, you can see how he made it and also the different stories that came about from that reporting recipe. But there's several different tools to track changes to government data disappearing or changing or not being maintained. And so one big one is Klaxon. And so that's part of MuckRock's document cloud. And as I mentioned, MuckRock is one of our partners. And this lets you set up alerts for when a page or a certain part of a page is changed. And this works on most government and campaign websites. This is really helpful because specifically you can set up alerts for a specific part of a page and not just an entire page. So this is helpful for tracking data changes. And one thing I'll mention about Klaxon is that it integrates really well with the Internet Archive's Wayback machine, and I'm sure most, if not all of you, are familiar with that. But in that integration, you can get notifications of changes over time, whether it's additions or disappearances. And then I also want to highlight this tip sheet. It's the bit.ly link right here. But at IRE earlier this year, Anna, along with some other people, including some people from Sunlight, were on a panel to talk about government data disappearances and what you can do to maintain that yourself. And actually tomorrow at Access Fest, we're hosting a similar panel. So make sure you attend if you'd like to. But the tip sheet from that is available right there. And that has a ton of different resources and highlighting different tools that you can use to track changes to government data.
And whether or not you're attending Access Fest or attended IRE, the tip sheet is, or even if you're not an IRE member, the tip sheet's fully available to anyone through the Sunlight site through that bit.ly link. So you should still be able to have access to all of those resources. And if there is something that you want to access that you can't, such as the slides or anything, please feel free to reach out to us as well.
Thanks, Anna. And I'll pass it over to you to talk about this.
Sounds great. All right, hopefully we don't set it off. Thank you. All right, so I was just going to talk a little bit about some of the tools that are outlined within that tip sheet that we noted. So I'm not going to walk through all of these because this is obviously a lot, but just some of the different tools that I've used over the years to track changes. So one of the roles that I've held over the years was while I was working with specifically Bloomberg Tax, was looking at a portfolio of a little bit more than 90 countries, I think 92 usually, of their payroll tax and labor law changes every single day. So anytime one of those countries had a change, I was trying to track it. There were a lot of issues with that and hurdles, and so I learned a lot about how to automate tracking changes during that time. Ended up working with the Sunlight Foundation during the first Trump administration on their website monitoring project to do some similar work to what's happening right now with tracking disappearing data, tracking the thousands of pages that were changing and disappearing. And so some of this says knowledge comes from that. This is just kind of a list of tools that I found that are really useful. You might not want to use all of them, but different tools have different benefits. So for example, Visual Ping is one I use a lot. It's got a great Chrome extension, but it's freemium, so there's a limit to how much you use it unless you want to pay. I tend to try to find more tools that are free or low cost for journalists, since I think that cost is an issue for a lot of newsrooms. Website Watcher does tend to be more expensive, but it's something that you can host within your own within Windows, and so if security or privacy is an issue, that can be another one that's really good. The other ones, and the big difference, and it outlines it here, some are better at scraping text, some are better at scraping numbers, some are better at scraping dynamic content or buttons or pages where you need to scroll or pages that have toolboxes that pop up. And so depending on the types of pages that you need to track at any given time, you might use a different tool for different things. And so these are all listed in the tip sheet at the bottom. Highly recommend checking them out. And if you have any questions along the way, feel free to reach out. For example, one's Firefox, Chrome. I could go through all the changes, but basically there's different ones for different uses. And then kind of going back to whether your data sets are at risk, I think we lost some of our white text to a white background during some of the conversion. Do you want me to do this or do you want to do it?
Either work.
I think I remember what was on this one, so happy to work on this. Happy to go through at least some of it. Or do you remember what was on this slide?
Yeah.
I think this one was yours, so if you want to do it.
Yeah, I'll snag this one.
That would be great.
I'm so sorry. Our slides all looked like this before, and now they look like this. But basically, it's really important to think about the data sets that you're using for your research and reporting if they're at risk. And if they're at risk, or if you're even questioning if they're at risk, make sure you check different databases online to see if they're there. And so there are several. I'm going to go into more on the next slide, which we'll see if the white text will be disappearing there too. But some of those include, it was like Gov Data or Data.gov, and there's Gov, what was the second one? I don't have it memorized off the top. There are two different ones listed on this slide that are also listed on this tip sheet that are helpful for finding government data. And so make sure to visit this tip sheet to check out those different resources.
And even if your resources aren't listed on something that they are disappeared or are at risk, it can be worth starting to track now, to add trackers to different websites to see if something could be at risk. There's very innocuous pages that sometimes can disappear or be altered or changed, and so that's something that that is worth tracking before it becomes an issue, so that you have those archived versions to look back on as well. I'm trying to remember what I saw yesterday. I just saw a page from OPM go away, and because it's in the Internet Archive, I was able to find the old version of the page. And so every day there's something that you might not expect to become an issue. So if you rely on something regularly, it's important to start now to set up archiving or set up notifications. I would recommend as soon as possible rather than waiting until it is at risk.
Definitely. And actually thinking about what was originally on this slide, which you can't see now, there are a couple of different organizations that we listed here, including the Data Curation Network. I'm sure a lot of you have heard of them, but they're a really amazing organization that works to teach everyone how to do things like archiving their own data and then preserving their own data. So yeah, if you are relying on a data set for your research and reporting, make sure that you're taking it into your own hands and preserving the data yourself. And so beyond the Data Curation Network. There's also the Data Liberation Project and the Data Rescue Project. The Data Rescue Project is a collaborative, volunteer-driven initiative that's composed of different organizations that work to archive data and provide everyone with access to that archived data. And then the Data Liberation Project is run by big local news and our partners at MuckRock. And on Data Liberation Project's website, you can find access to saved data and saved documents, so make sure you check that out. But otherwise, listed on this slide were a bunch of other kind of more independent organizations that are working to archive data. They're also listed in the tip sheet, the bit.ly tip sheet that I have linked in this slide and in other slides. But yeah.
So some tricks to keep track of the resources you use. Some of them, I think I mentioned I got a little bit ahead of myself since we have some blank slides. Archiving early, archiving often, I think is another one. So not only starting to archive now and starting to set up those notifications, but making sure that you are checking sites regularly for changes. It's not just about a site now versus when it changes. Sometimes these changes can happen gradually over time. There can be multiple different iterations of something. And so that's where I think the notifications can come in handy to be able to see, is something changing weekly? Is it changing monthly? And so really being cognizant of all of the different iterations of the resources you use and archiving each of those versions as they go. Another element of kind of keeping track of the resources is looking at the last updated date. It can be really important to see when something was last updated rather than just assuming it is up to date. This is particularly important right now with the reliance on government data, the shutdown being a prime example of something that has exacerbated an already significant issue where there are a number of under-resourced, understaffed agencies that may not be upkeeping certain data sets. It's always worth checking what the date of last update was or reaching out to those government agencies when they are open to try to find out and reach out. It can be great to actually establish that relationship. In many cases, when I've reached out to data specialists at government agencies or at the state or federal level, they've all been very friendly, very eager to help, and very happy to explain what information they're putting out. So it can't hurt to reach out as well as that. Some other tips to keep track of research. I'm trying to remember what all the other ones were. It's like a guessing game here. But I think that those were kind of the gist of it. Some more considerations with disappearing dating. This also had things on it, so apologies in it again. We can also share the slides with y'all, so you'll have these lists. Oh, perfect, you do have the slides, wonderful. I hope I'm guessing correctly with what's on them. But some of the biggest considerations really are that government shutdown, are the fact that data is getting stale. In addition to that, people leaving the government. And it's not just data disappearing, it's also data changing. It's also data being manipulated, not always for nefarious purposes. It could be the fact that a data dictionary disappears. It could be the code that you need to understand that information, or the accompanying, there's a lot of that could make data less valuable or usable that aren't actually a data set itself. And so it's really important to keep those things in mind as well as you are archiving and keeping up with different things. There's also the component of individuals leaving. So there's obviously that is another component that's exacerbating this, where not just the government shutting down, but individuals leaving the government en masse right now has left a number of agencies in an unprecedented, to some extent, situation. And so making sure you are archiving things, again, even if they aren't controversial, even if these aren't things that you would normally consider at risk, making sure that there is that archive. And this is something that's not, that even if you wouldn't consider yourself normally an archival journalist, or that wouldn't be your normal goal, even if it's just for your own personal purposes, if it's something you use regularly, having that can be really helpful. Having documents, having data sets, having an internal copy in case the external copy goes away or changes can be really valuable. And it also raises the question of accountability mechanisms, both for government and non-government sources. Traditionally, with government sources, we have been able to look at them as a credible source and cite them as usually pretty, in a different way than you would when a random person says something. From journalistic standards, there are usually less reasons to question official government numbers unless there's a reason to question it, and there are starting to be more reasons to question some of them. And so I think keeping that in mind as you are describing information without unnecessarily drawing conclusions or raising conspiracy theories. It's a really hard balance to strike between lending credibility to something that you know might not have credibility or causing a panic that doesn't need to be there. And so I think it's a really hard balance to strike. I don't know what the right answer to that is, but it's something to really consider as you are describing things of how much do I trust this data set that I'm using? How should I be describing it? For me personally, the way I've handled that is this site says this agency says this data set says this, rather than this is fact. And I think that there is an inclination, or at least there has been a number of journalists that I've read over the years to say this is fact, this is what the job numbers are, this is how many people are employed, unemployed, what have you. And for me, I make a point to cite this is what this says, this is what this shows, and rather than actually saying this is fact. And not saying it in a questioning way, not saying it in a way that I'm criticizing the credibility of something, but just citing that source, I think could be a good, at least for me, that has worked over the years as a way to handle it. But I know everyone handles things in different ways, and you kind of have to find what works for you. It also raises the question of accountability mechanisms with outside sources as well. So as you are not able to rely on government sources for primary sources of information as much, and other actors are starting to pick up some of that slack, there isn't as much of a standardized, robust accountability measures. Like there aren't systems in place to say, oh, they need to do this with the data. They need to hold this standard, have these checks. Whereas at least at one point in the government, there were, to some extent, those standards with inspectors general and a variety of other things. At least some agencies were pretty transparent about their methodologies. And there are varying levels of transparency, I think, with outside nonprofits and other organizations that are archiving this data. That doesn't mean you shouldn't cite these sources, but it's, I think, really important to go in and see those methodologies, check things for yourself. It can be helpful to have two sources checking those. If that doesn't exist, at least like asking yourself, why is this organization archiving this? If an organization is only archiving things in one issue area, why is that? Do they have an interest in this issue area? And so sometimes figuring out how to best describe an organization, even if it's not, like it could be an advocacy organization archiving something, and that doesn't mean you can't cite them, but describing them accurately as that source, I think, is really important because they aren't objective, but they're putting out important information. And so figuring out the best way to use that, and again, it's different for every news organization, different for every person, but it's something to consider rather than just consuming the data sets as fact as an alternative to the government data. So making sure that you are considering the source that you're getting it from. And I don't know if, Elizabeth, you had anything to add to this one?
You covered all of it.
All right. So on that note, switching over to the Sunlight Research Desk, make sure we're keeping on track. So as we mentioned earlier, I work with the Sunlight Research Center and head our research desk. This is an on-demand research desk that supports high-impact stories with things like backgrounding, document gathering, and data analysis. I know this was a bit of a jarring turn, so I think we can break for questions towards the end. We'll leave about 20 minutes to give folks time to ask things. So if you have any questions, please do save them. I'd love to hear all of those at the end and chat more. So we'll leave at the very least 20 minutes for questions at the end. And so our Sunlight Research Desk basically is a shared research desk. This came from the idea that many local news and regional news organizations and even national news organizations do not have research desks anymore. They don't have the capacity, the in-house knowledge, resources, time to be able to have their own research desk. And so this is a way for them to have access to that on demand. For those of you who haven't really worked with research desks, this is basically you could come to us and say, I'm working on this story, I need this data set, or I want to do this research, or I need to understand this data set, or I have a person, I want to background them, I want to know everything about them, or find a certain public record. wide range of different tasks that we could get at any given day. These are some of our examples of our collaborations. We work really collaboratively with the newsrooms. When they come to us, the process is really, they'll come out, reach out to us with a research request, and we will meet with them in the newsroom and usually loop in one of the members of the research team, at least one, to talk through what that request is and what is feasible, and talk through kind of what their timeline is, when they need things. Sometimes the request is more developed than others. Sometimes it's, I know I want to look into this person, or I know I want to look into this organization, but they don't really have much else in terms of what those resources they need look like. Other times they know very specifically what they need from us. And so we kind of parse that out over the course of sometimes one meeting, sometimes multiple. From there, we will assign that request to our research team, who will then work together over the course of, it could be a few days if it's a very urgent request, to several months for a much longer term, big investigative request. We have small, medium, and large requests. So a small request could be something like, I want to know all of the property records of this candidate, everywhere that they've owned property. Or I want to know the campaign finance history of this specific donor. Or I want to know all of the top donors to this specific candidate in a certain way. And so it's kind of one component of a person or an organization. A medium-sized project might be a little bit more robust, where we would be, a medium-sized project would be a little bit more robust, where we could say, do an overall background on a candidate. Say, I want to know their background, I want to know all of their property records, everywhere they've lived, all of their jobs, any other details, all of their educational history, all of their criminal history. It could be social media, looking at social media analysis. It could be talks they've given. It could be pretty much a full gamut of different things, and we can piece together whatever is of most interest to you for that specific story, either in a combination of small projects or piece them together into a medium-sized project, or in some cases, if you want to do a real deep dive, a large project, which could sometimes be digging into a whole network of groups, or a very, very deep dive into one person or organization or network of organizations. There's a lot of transparency and fact-checking based into the process, especially when we have longer-term investigations. Meet with the newsroom regularly, when they have availability, to make sure that we're staying on the right track. As we find new things, we want to make sure this is still useful and valuable to their story, that the scope and the direction of the story hasn't changed, and that we're headed in the right direction, because there are a lot of choices along the way as you do research, in particular with backgrounding, because going in, you don't always know what you're going to find. And so making sure that we're focusing on the things that are of the most interest to them as we know what we are able to find. And so it's a lot of check-ins, and then we end up generating a report at the end that outlines all of the key findings that we were able to find, which then link down to a much more in-depth section of the report, going down and kind of detailing everything, along with citations and an accompanying folder with all of the underlying resources, property records, campaign finance records, pretty much every document and link you will need in order to fact check and replicate the process. We also are always happy to help with fact checking the stories, looking over drafts, and anything else even after we pass off the research as well. So we're very collaborative throughout the process. And of course, we protect sourcing and editorial independence. We're very confidential. We make a point to be very careful. We've helped with some sensitive stories in the past, and are very cautious and happy to accommodate whatever needs you have as well. We have Signal to communicate as need be, as well as a variety of other channels. So whatever works best for you, we are happy to accommodate that. And these are just a few examples of our collaborations. This is a couple examples of some more recent stories from the research desk. On the right, you'll see the story from Wisconsin Watch about Michael Gableman. This was kind of a big deep dive into his career, where we looked into everything from his educational history to his classmates to campaign finance records, and pretty much the full gamut of his life. That's a good example of like a deep dive that we did. On the left is kind of more of a medium-sized project where we did small, I guess 3 small projects where we looked into 3 candidates who were going to be heading what's called Starbase, the new city in Texas, where where SpaceX is located, ahead of the election to make the city official. And people weren't sure who these people really were. So we looked into their employment history, who their families were, where their properties were, where they had lived, their employment history, kind of just seeing who they were in order to see who's going to actually run this town. So kind of more of a general overview. That's a good example of that. It's great for like voter guide types of things. We've done a lot of help with voter guides, help with debate prep. So if you run debates or anything or that type of stuff, kind of the cursory overview. So kind of the two ends of the spectrum with backgrounding. A few other examples of work we do on the left. I think that the text is a little bit small, but here's an example of the Nevada Independent work we did looking at lawmaker landlords, where we pieced together personal financial disclosures. This is a great example of looking at multiple different sources, which I think can be really important in research, where we pulled the personal financial disclosures that were required to be filed by state legislators, and we checked those against property records with the state to see which ones had properties that were not disclosed or who had reported rental income in their personal financial disclosures but did not report property. And so kind of looking at discrepancies in those. And ultimately they ended up using the defense that the forms were very confusing, but we did find some interesting discrepancies there. On the right, we also do a lot of digging into campaign finance records. This one is looking at the abortion travel ban elections, so looking at like ballot measures. We're always happy to crunch numbers, to collect numbers at the state or federal level, or walk you through, if you're not even sure if numbers or a database exists, we've also created guides for people with here are the databases that you might want to check out and guides on how to use them. So we have a lot of different, wide range of projects that we help with. Just a couple others, just to show off some of our stories. Arizona Luminaria, another one. The one on the left, that's just another example of property records where half the candidates in Southern Arizona's congressional special election didn't live in the district. That was a lot of checking property records of varying types. On the right, we also looked at criminal histories and PPP loans to see that one of the individuals running was also on federal probation, which was kind of an issue for him would have been an issue for him getting to Congress had he won. And so, if you can see this very light list here of the things the research does, the additional things that aren't really highlighted of those, we also do FOIA support. So if you're looking to file public records requests either at the federal or at the state or local level, we're happy to provide support in writing and submitting those requests, especially in partnership with MuckRock. We're happy to do help with document retrieval, any types of requests of that type. We're happy to, I think I mentioned data set identification, verifying data sets, verifying older, missing, or partial data, rebuilding data sets. For example, someone got a tip that a data set exists and that they'd build one, but they can't provide it. And so we, with the guidance of knowing where they've gotten the pieces, rebuilt that data set. And so things like that. We're also happy to help with data scraping, parsing, metadata documentation, so pulling things from PDFs and making that into usable standardized formatted data. And that's just examples of things we do. If you're looking for something else, please reach out to us still, and this is just a few examples. We do a lot. So I think that we are coming close to a good time to at least move over to some questions, and we can always go into more depth on those things later, but I will move it over to that and let folks answer questions and for both of us.
Yeah, sweet.
My name's Taylor Vance. I'm a reporter from Mississippi Today, and thank you both for being here. I'm just curious, now that AI has become so common, if y'all use AI doing research, and if you have any tips that you can share about maybe how we can ethically and responsibly use AI when we're doing our own research.
That is actually something we're looking into right now. Sorry about that. That's actually something we're looking into right now. We don't currently use it as a part of our research process. In my own personal time, I've experimented with discrete data sets to see how AI could potentially be used for cleaning data, for retrieving information, and have frankly not found it to be consistent or reliable enough for use in the research process. When I've played around with it, like I also have concerns about confidentiality. With feeding any information into that system, and with that, I would definitely want to get reporters' consent, and I don't know if any of the reporters we're currently working with would want that. But just from a reliability standpoint, from playing with it with outside data sets, I've found it very inconsistent. Even things like standardizing and cleaning up data, I've found ChatGPT inconsistent. Grok is a little bit better with the data sets, but just random issues with it, even with that. And so I don't think we're quite there to rely on it at this point, at least in any comprehensive way, especially with confidential data. It might be helpful as an accompanying tool for some people, like to get ideas for things or to find resources. But I would say anything that is more substantive or at all sensitive in any way, shape, or form, I wouldn't use it with at this point. That said, we are looking into it. Sunlight Research Center and MuckRock got a grant to look into using AI in research and how to more responsibly do that and develop policies. So I would stay tuned because we're going to release something on that at least like within the next year or so. So we're looking into it, and any ideas you have on that are also very welcomed as well.
Hello? Oh, okay. I sound like that? Okay. Anyway, so one question I had was about FOIAs and Freedom of Information requests. I know being specific is very helpful, and knowing what you're looking for is really like the key. But do you have any advice for how would you go about looking for data or looking for information that you're kind of on a fishing expedition? You have a sense that they have this data, but you don't necessarily know for sure what to look for. How would you go about finding or requesting things that you're not as specific about?
That's a good question. Usually I'll check the site first. I will look for their menu of the site, so do like a Boolean search especially, and look for key terms. So if, for example, I was searching for like a .gov site and I was looking for something about, I'm just gonna use daisies because I can't think of something specific and policy neutral. And I would just put that with the site.gov and combine it, and then maybe do file type XLS or something and see like if anything comes up and do a few variations. That's at least where I would start, would be looking at variations of the site and do some Boolean searches and see if I could find a site menu. If that doesn't work, I might try to reach out to whoever, if there is a person on the other end of the line who is friendly, talk to them. If that does not work, I would end up sending a request. There are ways to word it where that I've had decent success with before, where I'll say, this is the type of thing I would like. If this is not available, can you confirm the existence of more broad thing? Or kind of saying, can you if this specific data set isn't available, can you confirm whether you track this bigger thing that I'm trying to look into, or something like that. So I can usually get at least confirmed existence of something if you're trying to track something more general, if that makes sense. So I would say having contingencies in your FOIA request that if this isn't available, please provide this. If this isn't available, please provide this. Usually I've had pretty friendly people, and I'm like, and if you're not the right person, if you can refer me, but sometimes they're more confrontational, honestly, and they don't care, so that's hit or miss, but I've had decent luck with that in the past a few times.
Hey there, I'm Sean Keenan, I'm here from Atlanta. I feel like I need to preface my question with an example of what I'm talking about. In Atlanta, there's this big controversial police training campus project. It was like $100 million, and it was being built in the woods, clear cutting required, blah, blah. Obviously, a lot of our residents wanted to know how that plan came together, what they were spending their tax dollars on. The problem was the project was spearheaded by the Atlanta Police Foundation, which is a private entity, like a police lobby. So this local news outlet sued the police foundation and said, because you are effectively operating at the government's behest, you should be subject to public records requests. A judge said, okay, yeah, you're right. It didn't set precedent, but it did allow them to get those records. So the overarching question is, does Sunlight Research Center have any tools for identifying and obtaining records, public records that are not technically public records? And I bring this up because I cover housing. I think you mentioned one of your stories looked at landlords. Obviously, a lot of these corporate landlords camouflage themselves behind layers of shell companies. So actually understanding who these entities are can be tricky. So yeah, overarching question, how to find public records that are not really public records?
So in this case, it's a nonprofit that is government adjacent, if I'm understanding correctly.
The sole function of that organization was to work on behalf of the Atlanta Police Department, but they were still technically a nonprofit.
Cool, thank you. I would say I've had some experience getting public records directly from organizations. For example, getting tax returns from nonprofits has been probably my biggest experience with that, including ones that have no ties to government. So I would say it's tricky at times. Starting out friendly and then citing the rules has been probably the most effective way. I don't know if we have tools on this at all, but I think that could be a good thing to develop at some point. But I think different types of records from different types of organizations you have to request them in different ways. So just using nonprofit tax records as an example, they can legally require you to file a written request to them. And so I could call them and they're like, yeah, we'll give that to you. But then they're like, you have to write us a letter and then you have to mail us a check for 20 cents per page for this. And then we'll mail it to you up to 30 days from now. But also if they have a 9-to-5 business, if they actually have a place of business, I could just show up and they have to give it within 24 hours. And so there's a lot of intricacies to the rules. So I would recommend looking up what the rules are, if there are rules to look up around the group that you're trying to request from, and citing those, because oftentimes organizations may not even be aware that they're legally required to give those records away. I think it came as a surprise to some organizations that they legally had to provide their tax records in some circumstances, and so citing those rules I think can be helpful, but in a friendly way. So I would say looking up those rules, and knowing those, because obviously that's just one example, and there's so many different rules for different types of public records disclosures from organizations or individuals, and they're all a little bit different. Happy to help with that though. That seems like a more specific situation. So if you want to reach out, happy to help with that.
Hi, I'm Raisa Habersham with the Miami Herald. Thank you for being with us this afternoon. My question is kind of similar to Sean's. So I cover race and culture in South Florida, specifically Black communities. One story I've been working on recently focuses on a private HBCU. So it's been a little challenge to kind of get any bit of data. So my question to you is, have you ever had clients kind of where you're assisting them on getting any information, even if it's at the government level regarding private institutions? And how have you kind of navigated that process? I guess kind of my short answer, it's similar to Sean's, is like, where would I go around kind of looking for like back-end information regarding this institution?
Are you looking for any particular type of information?
Well, specific to this situation, there's been a lot of issues with their board of directors. There's been what they have said, hey, an ongoing coup. I know that they have given their new president, and that was a contentious hire, a 10-year contract, which may not necessarily be heard of. So in short, I guess the information I would be looking for is obviously the contract, any communication, obviously between board members, which I might could get, but I'm not sure how much of their, this university is kind of tied to like getting, say, grants, like if I want to do a separate story, grants from the government, so things like that. So on the small end, this president's contract, on the big end, anything that ties them to getting federal funding.
Got it. I think that honestly, the federal funding and grants are going to be easier gets. You can definitely see that through federal government sites. You can also see grants from other organizations in their tax returns. You can see outgoing grants to those organizations. If you search the name of that college in, for example, ProPublica's 990 search, or if you search the IRS Business Master File, so you should be able to track donors at least that way. Because it's a private institution, there's, depending on what their bylaws, they set their bylaws, and so depending on what that says, they might not be able to be legally required to provide much else, but I think it would depend what those say in terms of it would be legally required to provide you. But I would say starting with looking at government grants, looking at grants from other nonprofits if you're looking for funding type of information.
I'll add, oh, thank you. I'll add too that even if it's not a public institution, it's still worthwhile to search on the SEC, because you can either search in the SEC for like a ticker number or an organization that has to file with the SEC, or you can do like an in-text search. And so that'd be interesting to see where they pop up and what other organizations they're connected to.
Hi, my name is Simardeep Kaur. I work at the Walla Walla Union Bulletin. Thanks for being here. So I'm covering the hyperlocal impacts of the changing federal policies, and one thing I try to do is capture the voices of the people who are getting directly impacted. For instance, I did a story about cuts to Planned Parenthood, and one of my sources was a patient at the Walla Walla clinic. But it took me more than a week to get in touch with her because the director of the clinic had to connect us, and which is not always possible on deadline. So my question is there a faster, more efficient way of getting in touch with these regular people who are getting impacted by the federal policies, where you don't have to, where the organization itself doesn't have to be involved? Especially for like healthcare, stories like that involve healthcare cuts, because many hospitals and health centers, they'll just cite that, oh, we can't put you in touch with the patient because of HIPAA.
That's a good question. I don't know, do you have any idea? Oh,
sorry. So are you mainly asking about like sourcing?
Yes.
Yes. So actually at Sunlight, what we do is like, we don't do the sourcing, and we don't go out and like talk to individuals like that. However, we just had a workshop on sourcing where one of our co-founders, Jim Mintz, actually gave a presentation on how best to connect with these people and how to like build trust with them and get them to talk to you and give you information. So my best recommendation would be looking to that workshop and the tip sheet from that as well, which I could.
I think that would be really helpful to watch. I think it's very relevant here.
But yeah, at Sunlight, that's like, we generally do not do that, actually. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks for presenting all that you guys have. I have two questions. One is, I did a FOIA request recently my name's Whitney McKnight from The Edge in Kentucky, and I just recently did a FOIA from the State Transportation Cabinet. It took 5 months, like a little bit under 5 months. They did stay in touch with me the whole time, saying we need more time. But they eventually sent me something. I can't read it. I've tried to open it. I can't read it. And they said that this is typical. I'm wondering, is that normal for them to send information, or anybody to send information in a file format that you've never seen before? I was just trying to open it. I can't remember, but it's a zip file, and then it was like CAR and all these, like, I'd never seen it. I have no idea, and I can't open it. So I don't know who to go to help me. So I'm wondering if that's something that you guys have ever seen, and if you can help with that.
I'm not sure, but happy to take a look if you want to reach out.
Okay.
Yeah, happy. I don't know if we can fix it, but happy to take a look and see if it's something we can figure out.
You can at least say you've seen it.
Yeah, I don't know. I would have to look and see what type of file it is, but happy to take a look.
Okay, I've got your address, thank you. And then the second thing is that at least, and some other things that I've been investigating, it seems like FOIA staff, the people whose job it is to respond to FOIA requests, it seems like they're being cut back dramatically. So do you help, like, is there a way to navigate around that, and can you help with that? In other words, if it's taking longer to get back to you about a request, do you have ways to get around the delay because maybe you have connections or something like that?
I don't think we can get around if there's not a FOIA person, yeah. Unfortunately. Yeah.
Our partners at MuckRock, they are like experts in FOIA requests, and so it's great that we're partnered with them because they would be really helpful for any tips navigating that and potentially having connections with that as well.
Connect you with the right people. Like if, for example, someone leaves and someone new comes in, they would be able to help with that type of transition. But if there's not someone in the position, that's a little bit harder. Yeah. But I think they could at least help with like connecting you with the new people. So if you want to reach out about both of those things, happy to connect you.
Yeah.
Hi, Hi, I'm Abby with Salem Reporter out in Oregon. You talked about the disappearing data sets, which is scary on its own, but I was wondering, just as someone working at a wider lens than me, what kind of new and creative ways are you seeing a lack of transparency from the federal government? Like, we're all familiar with heavy redactions and things like that, but are you seeing increases in ways that public records are being withheld?
Yes. I've seen increases in wait times, but I think a lot of that's not necessarily deliberate as much as it's a byproduct of of people being either laid off or cut or leaving. I would say there are data sets literally being cut offline, just disappearing off the websites that at a pace, like it's happened before, but at a pace and like at a scope that has not happened in the past. I would say data sets are changing in ways like where, again, like keys to data sets are being removed. It's not even the data set itself. In some cases, it's the keys to the data sets, so you can't read it. And so I would say that those are some pretty significant issues. There's also a wide range of, I would say, I could talk about this all day, transparency issues in more of like the political sphere, I think. That's probably one of my specialty areas that I could talk about all day. If I don't know if you're more like government, I think, side, but like there's also a lot more with that as well. And always happy to chat about that too. So yeah, if you want any more on that, I'm happy to chat about that, but it would be a longer rant. Of course, yeah, feel free to reach out.
Hello, my name is Olivia. I work with AP. I've been digging into a story about lobbyists and who were working on a government business deal in Virginia, and I'm wondering if there's any pitfall. Like I've been really going at it through sourcing, but I think turning to FOIA just might be more practical for me at this point, and I'm wondering if you have any advice for just FOIAs in Virginia. Not to put you on the spot, but yes.
I would recommend reaching out to the Virginia Center for Investigative Journalism. They do a lot of really great work with that. They're a small organization. I think it's only like 2 or 3 people, but they do really good investigative work, and it might be able to help. If you ever end up on the campaign side, the Virginia Public Access Project also does some really great stuff. But I would say for the lobbying side, Virginia Center for Investigative Journalism might be helpful. I can't say I have done much in terms of like public records requests in Virginia myself. I'm actually about to move there, so I'm probably going to start. So, but I'm currently in DC, so I just haven't done as much in Virginia at this point. But I would say like certainly they'll have some good resources. Yeah, I mean lobbying in general. Also, just to actually get back to your question about government data and lack of transparency is another element that I've seen rolled back with, in particular, foreign lobbying with the Department of Justice, where in many cases it's not being updated and there are very few accountability mechanisms if someone doesn't file anymore. And so I think that's another, I think to some extent, undercovered story where filings are not always complete. And there's not as the same emphasis on enforcement that there used to be, so it's hard to know how much we're missing. Not to jump around, but that reminded me of it with lobbyists, so thank you. And happy to give contact information if you need as well, if you can't find their contact info, so feel free to reach out.
Hi. Sorry, wait, Olivia, were you done? Okay. I wasn't sure. Okay, I'm Mary. I'm with the North Dakota Monitor. Thank you for coming to talk to us, and thanks for what you do. I was wondering, are there any federal agencies with FOIA offices that you think are like run particularly efficiently, or seem to have be particularly helpful with journalists? Because I've had the experience of trying to put in a FOIA requests, and it seems like everyone wants to be helpful, but it still takes months or years to get back. So if there are any that do seem to be more responsive, I know it probably depends on the question, but I'd like to know if there are offices out there that would get back to journalists in an efficient amount of time. I'd be more apt to try reach out to. Like it'd be nice to know.
I would love to connect you with the folks at MuckRock. They've got some people who actually look at that type of thing and could look. They have statistics on that, I think, because like they've processed so many requests, they could look and see which agency gets back to people the fastest. I don't know if that's something they publish on the site, but at the very least, one of them could probably help tell you that. I don't know off the top of my head or have an example, because I feel like it's just kind of been a mess recently, and I feel like I can only complain about wait times, but I feel like that's not helpful here. But I would recommend connecting with MuckRock, reaching out, and they track so many FOIA requests. I think that they would have not just like one person's view, but honestly like actual numbers on which offices are statistically most likely to get back to you. So I think it's worth checking with them for sure. Mm-hmm.
Hi, I'm Julietta. I'm with the Modesto Bee in California. We have the Public Records Act, so we kind of get or can get records at a quicker turnaround. I was curious for reporters covering local governments, what are some public records you recommend requesting on a regular basis? Like what specific types of records should we be asking for and monitoring?
Oh, that's a good question. I would say any conflict of interest forms you can get, or personal financial disclosure forms for people like city council and mayoral can always be interesting. City contracts, if that's not something that's already published online, I think can be really interesting. To take that a step further, if you do find something interesting in the contracts, seeing any correspondence between the office that awarded the contract and the contractor can sometimes be an interesting thing to look at. And sometimes even piecing that together with campaign donations, sometimes like that. So like I would say like definitely contracts, any conflicts of interest forms, not all cities have them, but some do, and any personal financial disclosures that are, or campaign disclosures that are regularly filed by city council, mayoral, or anyone else in a major elected office, police chief, what have you. I don't know, Elizabeth, do you have anything to add with that?
I'll just add, I think, beyond requesting those, it's really key to compare them to each other over time. Like in particular, thinking about personal finances and campaign finance, it's really key to look at over the years, especially if this is a candidate who's run in the past or held office in the past, to compare them to each other and see any changes there. So yeah, make sure you don't look at things in a vacuum, I guess that's what I'd say.
Absolutely.
Thanks so much for being here. Carmen Russell-Suchansky from WHYY News in Philadelphia. So I have a same investigation, but kind of two pieces to this that I want to ask about. There is a activist in Pennsylvania who is who's right now working on our midterm judicial elections, and he first of all, so he has apparently raised a bunch of money in order to do this, and he was in the work last year. Recruiting, doing voter registration work and stuff like that. Supposedly, he received $5 million from Turning Point USA. When I looked in Open Secrets, I only see like $60,000 from, actually contributed by Turning Point USA. So I don't know if I can find that other money, or if maybe it just didn't happen because it was a promise. But he's also a very controversial figure, so I wouldn't be too surprised if they said.
What is his role?
He started Early Vote Action. Scott Pressler, he's actually kind of a national figure. The other piece of this is that it looks like he was living in Virginia, I think, coincidentally at some point. He moved to Pennsylvania and apparently bought a house. As far as I can tell, he paid cash for the house. Which for somebody who was unemployed before he started doing this was a little kind of iffy. We found the house, found the address just outside of Pittsburgh. I got a copy of the deed, called the recorder of deeds. Got a copy of the deed. There's where normally there would be, a mortgage holder or, whoever mortgage information. There's nothing there. The only thing I can think of is to because I want to see if there's a mortgage on the house, right? To see if he actually, try to figure out if this house was paid for by cash. The only other thing I can think of is title search. So basically the theme of the story is possibly that he's been raising all this money and, he bought a new truck apparently, and he's basically been spending on himself. I mean, pretty classic stuff, right? So, yeah, I was wondering if, number one, like, is there more that I should be doing to try to verify that he has a mortgage, that they paid for it by cash? It's not like a $2 million mansion either, by the way, but it's, a smaller house, but still. And then, how else I might be able to find if he's been getting money, through super PACs as opposed to just, regular PAC money or something, however Turning Point USA might have given him that.
Yes, absolutely. So the first thing, and I think you kind of alluded to this at the end, Turning Point has so many different nodes in their network that it's worth checking all of them because they might have given through a different node that is not tracked by Open Secrets. So Open Secrets will have the Super PAC and PAC, which report to the Federal Election Commission, but they won't have their nonprofit arms necessarily. And so they have Turning Point USA, Turning Point Action, Turning Point Endowment, and then there's one more, I think. And so all of them kind of funnel money between each other to cover various expenses. A few are C3s and a few are C4s. I would recommend getting all of their tax returns. You should be able to find most of those on ProPublica's 990 search. They file on, I believe, a July to June schedule, so they actually just filed new ones like a month or two ago. If you can't find those, let me know, because I think I actually have copies of them because I was curious and got those a few months ago. So feel free to reach out and I can just send the new ones to you. But the nice thing about Form 990s is you do have to report top 5 vendors, and you do have to report a decent amount of transaction information and outgoing grants. So it depends how they gave him the money as to whether it's going to show up in there. Like if it was a grant to an organization that he's running, that will definitely show up. But if they're paying, for example, him as a vendor, unless he's among their top 5 over 100,000, they might not show up. There's a few different places in the 990 I would recommend looking. Definitely top vendors, grants, sometimes like fundraisers or transactions with interested persons can sometimes be another one. Property, if they're just buying the property outright, if that's a theory. Just checking for anything like ownerships. And I'm also happy to walk through the 990. If you want to reach out, I'm happy to walk you through this as well.
Sorry, one really quick.
Sure, of course.
You made me think of something else. In expenditures, there's something like the vast majority of the money that they raised, that he raised and then spent, that's on the records anyway, went to fundraising consulting, like the vast majority, as opposed to mail. Like, here's a little bit of money for mailing, and I'm wondering if, he's the fundraising consultant there, if you think that could be the way that. That's interesting. Do they list a firm that they paid? The fundraising consulting firm, like who they paid for? I guess I probably have to get the actual form. I'm just looking at the top lines of. Yeah, you would have to look at the actual expenditures, but it might be worth checking that. And then when you see who the what firm is listed, you can then pull the incorporation record for that firm. Open Corporates is a great tool for that. And you can then, or if you know what state it's incorporated in, you can just search it generally. But the nice thing about Open Corporates is it searches all the states. And you can see if he is officially tied to it. But there's also other ways he could be loosely tied. So it's definitely worth checking that. That would not be unheard of for a political group to pay someone through a consulting firm. So absolutely, and yeah, happy to help with any of that as well. That sounds really interesting. Of course. Yeah, I would start with the 990s for the payment though, definitely, and the expenditures for the other part.
Well, our time has quickly run out on us, and I know that there were some slides that may have been difficult to read, but we'll make sure to get them to folks.
Thank you.
And so that they can get the full measure of what you presented. I also am glad to see that, many connections in the room you'll be following up with, I'm sure. And we thank you for sharing this with us, and thank you for working with them as they bring questions to you down the road.
Oh, thank you so much. And please, if anyone has follow-up questions, or if we didn't get around to you, or if you just have follow-ups, please don't hesitate to reach out. I love doing this type of stuff, as you can probably tell, so always happy to help however I can.
Please join me in thanking Anna and Elizabeth.